Oh, good. I didn't say that out loud. That's
No,
good.
well, you did. It just nobody heard it. That's all.
Yeah, that's cool.
All
South Park
right,
did it.
let's see what's going on here. It looks like I gotta remember what I'm doing here. All right, Facebook is going live to somewhere, which is always a good sign. Always a good sign. Let's see if we can get. Change happens immediately. All right.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a lot of meat we can dig into for each point of these. There's kind of a quick summary in that article, but there's a lot of NLP brain science behind most of them. Not everything, but most of them.
Right. Yeah, it's the good stuff with this. I was watching an article, I was watching an article. I think it was a Vice news article on YouTube this morning about China specifically, where they're kind of having a cultural revolution where the younger generation is going, hey, we've got some stuff going on, mentally. So talking about mental health, which has always been kind of a taboo thing. And I forget who was in charge of China back in the 60s and 70s, but he banned psychologists. He was all, it's not relevant, people.
Was that Mao's time? I don't know the dates.
Yeah, it could have been. I'm not sure.
I'm not really a dates guy in history. I'm more like, tell me the amazing stories, and history is so interesting.
Yeah.
It could be Mao. That's the only recognizable leader I could think of.
Yeah,
just from
possibly. So, but it's
the
interesting.
Western view of history.
Right. Yeah. But it's interesting that because of that, how far behind are they on, talking about it? And culturally, there's some cultures where you got to be good. You're not allowed to feel bad, or, there is no such thing as depression and those types of things.
Wow.
But one of the things that they were talking was also because of the shift to middle class, the shift from the farm to the city, all of those things, that you had a generation that was just focused on surviving. And that's kind of always been a thing for me. It's like, do we, how natural, and we've talked about this, how natural of an environment do we actually live in for our brain, for the, the caveman version, the critter brain, who's just interested in survival. And it's like, well, we don't really have to survive in the sense of, making sure I have shelter, making sure I have enough food. A lot of us don't. And so in China, they're noticing that because people are shifting, they have money, they've got disposable time. And, it's like, oh my gosh, what do I do? But they said that they have and I think it was in China in general, they have approximately 9 professionals, psychologists, counselors for every 100,000 people.
Wow.
In China. And that's it. So they're like, and they're overwhelmed right now. So if you want to learn Chinese, could be a great emerging market there.
Huge emerging market. Interesting. Yeah, and they have a friend of ours was telling me about the maybe we'll even bring him on to talk about it, although there's a movement in China called the Tangping movement right now, which I think it literally translates to lying flat.
Correct.
And it's basically just a psychological or psychographic movement of like taking care of yourself and not killing yourself through work and orientation about stuff.
Right.
Sounds a bit about what you're talking about.
Yeah, I'm sure it plays into it. Dun, 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 dun.
Oh, the effects are kicking in.
I always feel like a DJ. Dun, 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 dun. All right, that is the show. DJ Ryan in the house with my buddy Will Cordonley. Welcome to the No Fucks Given podcast. This is all about living your authentic life. And so Will and I weekly, we like to talk about some different mental health, if you will. That's kind of like the broad topic, if you will, the scary word out there. But really about, hey, what's going on in life? What's going on with you? And how can you live your authentic life? And that's really what we're here to talk about.
And that would be the orientation of the show being living an authentic life is one of the most deepest frames you can take towards actually your mental health and like your well-being. And there's a lot that goes into it, and some things about that are difficult. So we like to tackle all the different aspects of it. But
some of those things are difficult. Not life in general, folks. Not even being your authentic self, but just some of the things.
I will. I'll
no, I just love it
now,
because it is. I mean, the reality is some of that stuff, like being human, is difficult, folks.
Yeah, I call the phrase in my mind always comes up as God, being human so weird. That's just what keeps in my mind over and over and over again. Yeah. But living an inauthentic life is a diagnosable trauma response now. So it's not even just a theory. They call it fawning.
What? Hold it. Go back. Living an
inauthentic life, a life that's not true to yourself, is a diagnosable symptom of like trauma in your life.
Really?
It's the fourth. Yeah. So I'm kind of extrapolating a bit, but they have like, fight, flight, freeze. They added, some people, not everyone, someone add a fourth F called fawning. And fawning is essentially like compulsively pleasing people and like managing the emotions of situations to walk on eggshells and make sure you sacrifice yourself to make sure that no one erupts or things are okay. You fawn over people essentially.
I had a relationship.
It's a trauma compensation. Yeah, I think a lot of people have been there. It's good that we actually. When I read that, I was like, oh, okay, like we're putting that to words to this experience as it's a compensation for traumatic experiences, and it becomes almost an orientation or a personality, if you will. And it's inauthentic and it's bad for you. So
it's bad for you,
living
folks.
an authentic life is the antidote to that, even though it could be really hard. Coming out of fawning probably is a very difficult but doable situation.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll talk about that sometime.
Yeah.
But that's not what we're here to do today.
That's not what we're here to do today. I'm going to turn your mic down just a smidge here. You are talking perfectly fine. It's just coming in a little loud on my end.
Okay.
You are talking wonderful.
Ryan is the master here. He's the brain scientist and producer of the show. So he's doing many things.
It's the joys of being the producer. So people, if you notice my eyeballs running all over the place, it's just because I'm checking things to make sure everything is working great so that you have a positive experience on the show. And part of that positive experience is probably just kind of getting into it, right? I always love it when people just jibber jabber for the first half hour of a 45-minute thing. And then it's like, okay, let's go ahead and talk about what we're going to talk about. So let's actually talk about what we're going to talk about. What do you say, Will? Should we do that?
Hey, I'm all for it.
Let's do that,
man.
One of our, apparently it's one of our recent favorites, which is Inc. magazines. We talked, was it just last week or the week before? We pulled, I believe it was an article from week. Yeah. Great title, really crappy article. This one that we found last week wasn't crappy. It was a fluff piece. Let's face it. But it was a great title. So we stole it.
A bit light. Yeah.
Well, yeah. It didn't have a lot of value to it in our opinion. But it was from 2018. This one, I don't have a date, but how to immediately change your life for the better. I think what Inc. magazine does is they have really good copywriters in the title section because how to immediately change your life for the better. We had a little, I had a little with this article, or not the article, but the title, in the sense that it's almost like, hey, if you come to this weekend seminar, we're going to have 3 powerful days of change and motivation. And as we already know, what that wears off in a day, couple of days, maybe a week.
Yeah, I think at best you got about 2 weeks from something that gets you energized and excited.
Yeah.
If there's nothing else other than being motivated and energized.
Right. Yeah. And so, and you can get energized by exercising, walking, listen to a favorite song. We've talked about this in different podcasts in the back. So I have a little bit of an issue with the word immediately, how to immediately change your life. Because as we've talked on this show, it really goes much deeper than that. So much so, you were, gosh, I've already forgotten if it was in the pre-show or if we were talking live. You were talking live. The 5th F that they've added to
the 4th F, fawning. Yeah,
fawning. We were just talking about fawning. So if you could immediately change things, I think everybody would just be happy. We would be living our authentic life. You and I would have nothing to talk about, and it would be a sad day. So
yeah, it'd be good. You know, we would be like, oh, there's no more pain in the world to revise. That
what are we gonna do?
This is the death of our show. But then we could rejoice that, you know, the world has moved to a different orientation, and then we'll figure out what's next.
Yeah.
Because mostly everyone's out there moving away from pain, not so much moving towards joy, which is kind of an odd thing to say.
Right. But it's the way the brain is wired. It
is absolutely because of that.
Yeah. The first time I heard that you cannot survive happiness, I had to think about it, and then my mind exploded. We can only survive really traumatic experiences, things that suck, things that don't feel good.
I think my mind just exploded. That just clicked in a different way. Yeah, that's one of those sentences that you're kind of like, yeah, that sounds simple and not very profound, and then it has a billion layers to it the more you think about it.
Yeah. So the fact that you can have immediate change, when we were talking about this the other day, you know, we were trying to talk about some of the different concepts that we wanted to pull out of this for the show. You said something pretty profound to me, and that was, but change is immediate.
Yeah, that was what I think you and I both had similar reactions to the title, and we were both kind of actually, maybe we even talked about it a couple of weeks ago. It's the headline writers are the highest paid copywriters in many organizations because it's the most important part. It gets, you know, if you don't start right, you can't get anyone to stay on your page and sell them advertising at the end of the day or whatever it is. Yeah. But so when I read that title, kind of knowing what I know, I'm like, that's pretty misleading. But and also part of my mind, it splits it. I'm like, well, how could I say no to that? I can't. That's compelling. You know, tell me more. Like, and it reminded me when we were preparing for the show. It reminded me of I'm sure it's been said a million different ways, but it reminded me of a Tony Robbins quote where he said, "Change happens in an instant, but like noticing it takes you notice it over time."
Right.
So when we actually change and revise a belief or a part of our identity or like a patterned experience in our mind, it does happen instantaneously.
Right. So
and
it's a
what
matter
you and I would call integrating it into our life, noticing whether it integrated or it didn't, that takes a lot more time usually.
Right. So so change itself, when it happens, is immediate, but how to immediately change. So how do you get to the change? That's like, how do you summit the mountain? Because once you hit the summit, you're there. But if you're at elevation ground, you know, you're at the ocean and you want to climb Mount Whitney, which is, I don't know, 15,000, I forget what it is. You got a little bit of a climb in front of you. So let's that's a
great analogy. Yeah.
We're going to break this.
How to immediately see an incredible view first climb 14,000 feet, and then you'll instantaneously see an amazing view. Yeah.
So you got to
that's kind of more realistic.
Yeah, you got to kind of put the work in, unless you own a helicopter or something that can get you there. But even that's going to take time. But there are ways to kind of shortcut or shorten the gap, right? If you could compress the mountain a little bit so that you didn't have to climb as far, then maybe that's one way of doing it. Or is there a way that instead of walking up the mountain, you could run up the mountain, or maybe get in a car and drive up the mountain, right? There's all these other options that we often don't see, that we're not aware of, that can actually get us to what we want faster.
Sure. Yeah. And this article is interesting because as I read through it, I'm like, it actually kind of delivers on the promise of the headline, because some of the things that they talk about, you could potentially congruently change your mind and your orientation about instantaneously. They're kind of mindset choices.
Right.
Whether you maintain those in a useful way is where the headline gets a bit misleading.
Yeah.
But you can revise some stuff instantly by thinking about the stuff in this article. So
right. Yeah. So this is I think it's a nice place to start. And if people are looking, kind of like greasing the wheels, you got to get things moving. If you're just standing at the bottom looking up at the top of the mountain and you're not moving forward, then you're not making any progress. So, this is a good kind of article to go, okay, maybe I'm going to start stretching. I'm not quite, I know I need to climb the mountain, but I'm going to start stretching. So, and these are great articles for that. And they open with kind of an old joke where a man says, I really want to go to medical school, but it takes at least 7 years, and I'll be 50 years old, essentially, in 7 years. A wise friend replies, and how old will you be in 7 years if you don't go? Dun, dun,
That's
dun.
deep.
Yeah. Yeah. So time will not stop. And because time doesn't stop for you, the first thing that they recommend that you do here in this article is address the choices that you've made in the past and change the choices you'll make in the future.
And that, has an immediacy to it, I guess, when you think back on your life and your choices. Although, and this is where I'll maybe take some contention with the language. I think we call patterned experience, what you and I would call patterned experience, or automatic thoughts or behaviors that come from unconscious beliefs mostly. They're calling them choices. So I wouldn't necessarily call them choices, although it's technically accurate. And there's something empowering about that, and there's something also just not totally accurate either. So when you look back on your life and you're like, I've made so many bad choices, you probably didn't have any choice about that. Actually, I'll drop the probably from that sentence. You did not have any choice about that.
And just to kind of for further clarification, when you say choice, are you talking about conscious choice?
No, I'm talking mostly about unconscious drivers that either make unconscious choices or unconscious factors that feed into what we would call conscious choice that almost make it not conscious choice.
Right.
Because there's a lot of other elements to it that we had no idea were at play.
Right. Yeah. Because I think a lot of people feel that, oh, yeah, this was my choice. I keep, for whatever reason, I keep on choosing to do the wrong thing. So kind of like what they're saying here is address the choices that you've made, the decisions that you've made in the past, but realize that there's part of that addressing those choices is being able to identify, okay, what is the unconscious, subconscious systems that are creating the patterns that are pushing me to make these choices?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's I'll just say kind of a big frame from our training That will take a while to unpack, but I'll just say it. Hopefully it's useful for people, but we always and only move towards the best choice on life's menu.
Right.
Period.
Right.
That's how our brains work. So when I say we, I'm talking more about the unconscious drivers in our system than our conscious thinking mind, although that's included as well. Right. Whatever we did was the best feeling option that we've had the experience was available to us at the time.
Right.
And that might sound insane depending on what you're thinking about right now.
Yeah.
But this is where we say, okay, if my brain's always moving towards the best feeling option on the menu, I wonder why all these horrible things were the best feelings, best options available on the menu at the time. And given that, and, you know, including that inside yourself, what would I like now? What would I like to consciously choose?
Right. Yeah. And it kind of flies in the face of this article where it's saying that, okay, address the choices that you've made. Doesn't really go into how, because that's a much deeper question, and then change the choices that you'll make. Well, if you only have these choices available to you based on belief and identity and patterning and all that type of stuff, and yet you're saying make different choices, how do you make different choices? It's kind of like if you go into a restaurant and there's only 3 items on the menu: chicken, steak, and fish, as an example. And you're like, but I want to be a vegetarian. So if these are the only 3 items available on the menu of your life, and do I want to not eat because it's the only available option is these 3 options, or am I going to choose, well, maybe I'll become pescatarian. I forget what it's called. Pescatarian. Thank you.
Yeah.
Where, okay, I'm going to, but because I only have 3 choices available to me, I'm going to choose the best option available, which at this point sounds like fish. So then the question is, how can I add a vegetarian option to this menu of life, if you will? And I don't know if that's the best analogy, but
well, and kind of from our frame and a change work frame, it's how would you create it? And
right.
In this metaphor, it'd be change your environment. Would get up and go to a different restaurant would be one functional part of that.
Right. Yeah. So addressing the choices that you've made, this is like super important.
Incredibly important.
However, it is much deeper than, do we even have 2 sentences, than the 1 sentence that we have here. So the information, incredibly important. And I think part of this is also, one of the things is the OMG, WTF, and then okay. So kind of going through the emotional process that you need to go through and going, hey, these choices I've made in the past, OMG, I actually did that. Like, what the fuck? OMG, I did that. And then being okay with it. Not that it's okay, but okay, I did this. And part of that is just letting go. And again, easier said than done. Much deeper conversation.
And, part of that saying okay to the past, it doesn't even have to do with yourself or about the choices or the morality or anything about that. It's more like what's done is done and can never be undone. So given that, what would you like to choose to create next in your life? Right. Given that the past is the past, and it actually kind of a weird thing to say, but it's functionally true. It doesn't actually exist. The past doesn't exist. Your future doesn't exist. You only right now exists, and right now, and right now, and right now. Yeah. but our brains are informed by the past, which doesn't exist, and that's kind of weird. And we can choose about the future and where we want to point our ships towards, which is just a hallucination, but also like a powerful creative force all at the same time.
Yeah.
And I think, even though it's one sentence and it's almost kind of flip, where at the end it's like, well, make better choices. Like, well, how fuck do I do that?
Easier said than done sometimes,
Yeah, but it's true, and part of that, and I think we've kind of been a theme on this show, and I think it's a theme for all humans in life that we talk about. It's like, I would get in the habit of making conscious choices, as if your conscious choices will reality into existence in the way you want it to, even if that's not your experience yet.
Right.
That is a very, very, very powerful practice and habit to get into.
Right.
About anything. I'm choosing to drink this glass of water right now. Mm-hmm. It's my choice to have lunch right now.
Right.
It's my choice to breathe oxygen. Whatever it is, I'm choosing to watch this movie on Netflix tonight.
Right.
You can go as tiny or as big as I'm choosing to change the trajectory of my career and whatever it is.
Right.
But it's a muscle, and that one, if you want to make better choices, I think it starts with working that muscle out, with just knowing that everything you do is a choice, unconsciously, but making it conscious changes the dynamic.
Kind of bringing an awareness to it so that you start recognizing the choices that you're making, so that you can identify it and go, oh, maybe I choose to make a different choice. I have a friend who does that around money, and it's the first time I've heard it. Instead of saying, I don't have money for this, she'll go, I choose not to buy this. Or if I'm instead of putting in the mindset that I'm broke, because again, whatever you think about yourself, the unconscious critter brain says yes to. The unconscious mind says yes. Doesn't care what you say. If it says I'm broke, it says yes. And that is the filter that it starts viewing the world from, and it's going to find ways to make you broke, because that's what you're telling it to do.
I'm broke is kind of a statement of reality, but if you say it enough, it starts to become an identity. I am a broke person. I am a person who doesn't have money.
Right.
And then your brain looks to confirm that experience, because your brain's it wants to keep reality coherent. Broke people don't have money.
Yeah. So, and it says, okay, not a problem. We can do that, because brain don't care if you're happy or not, folks. Just so you know, brain don't give a damn. It just wants to make sure you're alive. Very powerful
drivers, part of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
The critter brain don't care if you're happy. Your conscious thinking mind, which is powerful, but also a piece of the puzzle, cares a lot about if you're happy. Many of the other parts that drive your whole experience are unconcerned. It's not even a factor.
Yeah. Good clarification there.
Mm-hmm.
So let's jump in the number 2. Go ahead.
I think you made a really important point, though. A really important point, that your brain will do whatever you tell it to over time. It's malleable. The malleability of our minds, the fact that the part that keeps us alive doesn't care if we're happy. It's not like, and not even that it doesn't care. It's just that it doesn't even consider it. It's not like, I don't know what happiness is. That doesn't matter. Yeah.
Not even,
That doesn't, the fact that some parts of our mind aren't malleable doesn't mean that most of it isn't completely malleable and changeable over time. And that's an incredibly important part.
Yeah.
Our subconscious always just says yes or okay.
Right.
I'm broke.
Yep.
Okay. I don't have money. Okay.
Okay.
I'm starting to have a lot more money in my life. Yeah. Okay. Sure. Whatever, boss,
Right. Yep.
And this is where consciously making choices starts to have you kind of in that boss seat of your mind. The conscious thinking mind is meant to push in the directions to the rest of the mind. And over time, build in this pattern where our conscious choices become more and more of our conscious reality.
Right, right. And change, like it says here in the first one here, make choices and change the choices you make in the future. It can be part of that conscious, but you got to have that awareness. It reminds me of the guy I saw on a podcast years ago who was down and out broke. And finally, his epiphany was, if all the decisions I've made led me to today. So he kind of looked at his menu of, his available choices on his menu. He goes, all of these choices that I've made that are available on my menu today have led me to where I'm at today, which is I literally hit rock bottom. What if I flip the menu over and whatever it says on this side, I'm going to make a new menu and just do the opposite on this side. So because he had that conscious awareness that this menu wasn't not serving him, he decided, and metaphorically, he decided, I'm just going to do the opposite. Instead of turning right, I'm going to turn left today. Instead of walking, I'm going to jog. Instead of this, I'm going to do this. And sure enough, huge success because he decided to make choice. And I think part of that kind of ties into number 2 is speak up with honesty and stop holding back what you think. So these are these kind of like those internal conversations that we have with ourselves. Oh no, I'll be fine. It's, blah, blah, blah. And underneath it, that's not the case. You're lying to yourself for whatever reason.
Yeah, interesting. Well, number 2 brings up a lot of stuff. I think just to bring up that last guy that story you talked to about the guy who does the opposite of his kind of thing. I think that's a Seinfeld episode too. I wonder which one came first. Yeah, I haven't watched a ton of Seinfeld, but I believe it's like George. He's like, man, I just choose wrong every time. So I'm just going to do the opposite of what I think I should do. And I think he like gets a job and a beautiful woman and all this other stuff, basically, just by doing the opposite of his instincts.
Yeah.
Tough way to go through life.
Tough way until you recalibrate.
Yeah.
It's just, and then it's just a calibration that, oh, okay. Start noticing what feels good about choosing the opposite and going, okay, there's going to be a little room. There's going to be that little spot where you're like, oh, is this the way I really feel? Or is this the new feeling? And keep on making choices. You'll figure it out.
That is one of the most important life skills. Keep making choices.
Yeah. And move forward in the smallest ways that you can. Just keep moving forward in the smallest ways you can. So anything you'd like to add? I feel like kind of everybody understands this one, especially if you've been in a relationship and you're not very happy and it's like, oh no, it's just a moment in time, or it's just, we make excuses, and yet it's like at some point we got to go, why am I doing this? It's really not a healthy relationship as an example for me to be in. It's time to cut the cord and be real honest with myself, because just like the guy in number 1 who's debating going to college for 7 years because he'll be 50, but it's the same thing being in a relationship, folks. Only time is going to pass you by. And there's plenty of fish in the sea, as they say.
And if you're in a relationship that's not serving you and you continue to stay there with that knowledge, why might that be the best option on your life's menu at this time?
Right.
There's no one answer to that, but that's an important question.
Right.
But number 2 kind of hits me. It ties into number 1. I think you can, speak up with honesty. I think you can do that internally and externally. So I forget who said, there's some old famous quote. I forget who said it. It's like, the trick is not to fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. Something to that degree. And I think we are excellent at fooling ourselves a lot of the time, because we're feeling creatures. We think we're conscious, rational, thinking, logical humans, and that's an element of us. But as you point out a lot, Ryan, especially in sales context, like, we're driven by our feelings, period. That's actually what's at the helm.
Right.
And what creates our feelings can come from our conscious choices and mostly our unconscious beliefs and unconscious parts of our identity.
Right.
So when we start to bring some consciousness to this, speak up internally, like when you look at your life and the choices you made, where has it gotten you? Oh, things are pretty great. Okay, awesome.
Right.
Then you're doing great. That's certainly possible too. But I think number 2 is pointing more towards the external, speaking up about, and I think it mentions friends in the couple sentences there, where that kind of makes me think more of the 4th F that we didn't plan on bringing up, but here we are, and here it is coming relevant. If you have friends that you're not being honest with just to make it easy, that is a form of fawning. It is a form of people pleasing. It is you walking on eggshells in your life, and the energetic cost of that is immense.
Right. Yeah.
And as I said, it's kind of diagnosable is maybe a strong word, but it's a noticeable response to trauma. It's a not being honest with people and choosing unconsciously, we'll say, to keep people around you and keep friends around you who you can't be honest with and who maybe are kind of emotionally or physically dangerous, so you have to fawn around them just to keep the peace. Why is that the best option on life's menu right now, if that's the case? Right.
Yeah.
Probably because that's what early life was like, would be the biggest generality you could say about it. But
right. And we've talked about that in prior episodes. I know we've kind of touched on that subject. So yeah, I mean, and part of that is, if you're not happy with where you're at, who you're surrounding yourself with is going to be part of that. And so as you choose to have different change, that sense of belonging is going to change energetically among your friends. And you're going to start identifying who are the true friends that resonate with you even as you're changing and aspiring to do better. And then there's going to be other people that are going to kind of go, hey, you know what, you really don't belong with me anymore. Or there could be jealousy. There's all kinds of things going on, and obviously jealousy is their own internal reflection that they're pushing out.
They probably won't say it that directly, but their actions will say, hey, you probably don't belong with me anymore.
Right.
Because you're just not willing to be as miserable as I am anymore. That kind of thing.
That kind of thing. So you gotta be prepared for that. And it's one of those things that you've got to make choices. And is it okay if I don't belong with the same group of people if they're holding you back? Or it's not that they're holding you back, but it's just that energetically, that's not the energy you want to be in. You got to be okay with moving forward then.
Yeah, if as you grow, you just resonate differently and you don't resonate in the group that you belong in. Some people are like, yeah, great, I'm ready for it. And sometimes it's wildly complicated, especially when it's family of origin. Not friend group so much. Do you not resonate with your family anymore? In the old Bert Hellinger phrase that we throw around here a lot, in a family of thieves, the one who doesn't steal has a guilty conscience. Right?
Yeah.
If you're done stealing because it just feels bad, but you can't belong in your family, that's a tough situation to be in, even though logically it seems very simple.
Yeah, very much so.
And it's this is a biggie. This is an important one, and it comes back to being authentic, and it's like the heart of being a honey badger and listening, no fucks given, just living your authentic life is basically saying how you feel. And I would add in, just a tiny bit of discernment about which battles are worth it and which ones aren't. I think that's really important. It's just you don't want to go out in the world and say, this is just how I feel all the time, and I'm just going to do it no matter what. Because some people kind of can take this too far, for sure.
Right. Yeah.
Because fighting every battle's absolutely a bad tactic and a complete waste of your time and energy too.
Right.
So some discernment about what matters and what doesn't.
Right.
And that's a tough one, but putting your attention on that.
Mm-hmm.
When does it matter to fight the battle and speak your truth? And when does it make way more sense to just know what your truth is and like excuse yourself politely?
Right.
You know, I think that's an important skill.
Right, because you don't always have to do this, right? You can do this also, and just you can just let shit go by you. Not
only is that a perfect analogy, but it's martial arts based, so double word score, man. I love it. You're right. I mean, from my time in Muay Thai kickboxing, I remember my coach would tell me, it's like the best defense you can have is not to be there.
Right.
It's not blocking a punch. It's not being in the way of the punch, basically.
Isn't that probably comes from Art of War? Who knows? There's probably different variations that all came up with the same concept years ago.
Yeah. I think, when I said that phrase, I'm like, oh, you could hear this in a very deep philosophical way. When he was saying, it's just like, look, if a punch is coming at you, blocking it is an option, but just not being in the way of it is the best option.
Right.
And then the even better option is to see it coming and position the counterattack to work, you know, as you position away from it. So there's a lot of levels to it. But yeah, I'm sure that comes from the Art of War somewhere.
Yeah. There was a story, gosh, it's been years ago, so I'm going to paraphrase it in not a very clean way, where a little kid is asking like an admiral, Japanese admiral about, hey, if this happened, what would you do? And it's like, oh, well, we'd get this ship and we'd do this. And then it's like, oh, okay, but what if there was 3 or 4 of them? And he's like, well, we'd have to bring in another ship and then we'd probably do this. And he goes, he goes, but what if every country brought every ship? And he goes, he looked at the kid and this was in some meeting. So everybody was like, oh my God, the kid asked the admiral, it's impossible. You're going to get blown to smithereens. You're going to die. And essentially you'd have to admit defeat. And he leans into the little kid and he goes, I wouldn't be there. So kind of, choosing your fights, right? There's some fights you want to show up for because that's part of being authentic and being in your own weight. And then there's other times it's like, I don't even need to be here, folks.
And that's kind of like some deep 4D or 5D chess kind of foo too. It's like, what's the best way to win a battle? Not have to fight it in the first place. Every great war strategist said that. So don't be there.
Don't be there. Don't be that person.
Yeah. But speaking your truth and not kind of placating people just because well, actually, when we walk on eggshells, we think we're managing other people, but we're actually managing ourselves. We can't handle the tough emotions of either the rage or invalidation that will come from them, or we can't handle kind of the authority and, so many things that can happen from just saying what you want to say and kind of being seen as that person in the world.
Yeah, and if you feel that you are just managing other people, imagine though there's how many millions of people in the world, and back in the pre-COVID days,
soon enough.
Yeah, and in the pre-COVID days, for some people, how many people are you interacting with on a regular basis? And if you have to manage not just one person, but 2 persons, but 5 people, but 10 people, but 20 people, but 100 people, it's like that's just a lot to for your mind to deal with on a regular basis. Talk about emotionally draining.
Yeah, so, completely emotionally and energetically draining. And it's like, it shouldn't be this way, that you grow up in a certain environment where everyone feels like an assassin, either functionally or emotionally. And then you go out in the world and you're in a world full of assassins. Right. And you just somehow keep finding and attracting, and like moths to a flame, these right. people in your world. And then it confirms that the world is just like this. Mm-hmm. But it's not. It's that your world is like this.
Right.
And that's a tough one to deal with. You know, go back to number one, get intensely real and about your reality and the right. like what's happened in the past. Like being intensely realistic is an incredibly important part about, and not tricking yourself and just looking at things and being with tough feelings is really important part of creating change. When you and I work with people, a big part of the session, which is usually an hour and a half or 2 hours, is talking about what is going on right now. So it's outcome based, right? So what would you like to create or change in your life? Okay, awesome. Now we have like on the life's map, when we're about to set sail, we have an X, we have a destination to get to. That's the important first part. Mm-hmm. But what is it like right now? What has been going on? And like right. really understanding that experience and being with it. Those are two different things, but both are important. Mm-hmm. Is fundamental. You can't change it without that.
Right.
So we're kind of about doing it for yourself in this place.
Right. Right. Yeah. All right. Good stuff. We're we're 45 minutes in here, sir.
So I think that part two was inevitable.
Our goal was to when we were originally talking about this has got 10 items on it. We're like, oh, we'll get through the first 5. And so here we are we finished 2 at 45 minutes. So if we go 2 hours on today's show, we might be able to get through 5.
Yeah. Well, maybe some will go faster. I don't know. I think
maybe some will go faster.
This article is kind of cool because it introduces massive topics and then explains them in 1 or 2 sentences.
Yes.
So
very
like
quick,
it's kind of useful, but it's also good to like, let's unpack this because there's a lot of stuff that can make this. It's like, all right, this is good advice. Let's make it way more functional by unpacking it a little bit.
Yeah. It's kind of like going to one of those powerful weekend seminars without the follow-up, without the, I think where a lot of these seminars where they fail is when they don't have any type of ongoing coaching support and those types of things, because there's so many questions that people have that unfortunately you're not able to answer in a single. This one's got 2 sentences in this one here, so
it must be important.
Number 3, super important, folks. Forgo being a perfectionist. Perfectionist does not exist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Classic advice.
You going to be able to live with this one? Okay. Not being a perfectionist.
Oh God, I am. I'd like to say I'm on the other side of my perfectionism, but it comes back every once in a while.
Right. It's part of understanding who the authentic you is. So what is it that you're going to hold your ground on and say, no, this is the way it needs to be versus, compromise, if you will. Mm-hmm. But yeah, this is, I'm surprised at talking with people how much this comes up, that they're not allowed, especially when we do, training type of stuff. It's, doing training, people have paid thousands of dollars to go learn something. And I'm presupposing that they're going to it to learn something because they don't know it. And yet when you ask them to do the exercises, they get really nervous because they're afraid they're going to do it wrong. And it's like, it's okay to do it wrong, because that's how we learn. Unfortunately, a lot of society, I got to get an A on that test, so I can't get any of the answers wrong. Or, you get into other cultures and it's very to be wrong.
Yeah, it's a biggie. And, our school system, that's a great point. We kind of orient people away from it. And it's the antidote to perfectionism is truly recognizing the value in making mistakes and missteps. We can't learn without making mistakes. We cannot learn. When we learned to walk, we fell down thousands of times.
Right.
We had to stand there and wobble around and fall down. There's in the NLP training at Ryan, I come from one of the oldest, I think, parts of NLP. They have these things called presuppositions, is there's no failure, only feedback. I think that's one of an older original thing from the 70s. But we have to understand the value of failure as a fundamentally important thing in life. And that's a hard pill to swallow. I'm like, even as I say it, I'm like, yeah, easier said than done, like for myself included. But it's like, can we take this frame and just hold it and like fight for it even when it gets hard?
Right.
Because the mistakes are how we learn and how we like add texture to our life and our brains and like color in the out in and outside of the lines of our lives.
Right. And also kind of tying into number 2, as far as kind of being honest with yourself, and might be a little bit of a stretch, but it's kind of like, where's your focus at? So if the focus is I'm a failure, then that's all you're going to see. But there's so much learning that is tied into, what happened, and what is failure? They say if you shoot for the stars and you land on the moon, success. Some people might consider that to be a failure, but I really wanted here, but I went from here to here. And because I didn't hit my goal, I'm a failure. And yet there's so much value in what's happened here, that if you're focused on just the failure part, kind of being honest with yourself as far as maybe there's an identity or a belief structure in place that doesn't allow you to be successful or to not fail. Because if you have an identity or belief structure that says I'm a failure, then that's the way your system is going to be seen. It's like putting sunglasses on that says I'm only going to see the ways I failed, versus seeing all the positive things that you accomplished, even though you might have only made it 95% of your goal.
Yeah. There's probably also some flavor of identity of like beating yourself up, or I don't know how to put it. There's so many ways it could show up. Some extrapolation of self-hate or self-annihilation or invalidation, right? Where you make a mistake, usually you can just be like, oh, that wasn't right, let me just course correct, as opposed to proceeding to, I made a mistake, I'm wrong, I always do this, why does this always happen to me?
Beat myself up.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So it's not the like mistakes, if you look at them as an important fundamental part of being a human being, which is kind of scientifically verifiable, like we're counterintuitive and we make irrational decisions and we make mistakes and it just happens. But if you can just bounce away from them quickly and take them as feedback, like, oh, okay, that wasn't the right road. There's the right, I'll recorrect to the correct road. And if it doesn't come with really, really tough emotions in one way or another, then it's pretty easy to do.
All right. Yeah.
So, and if it does come with those tough emotions, like getting real about that, really noticing that is super useful information. And what's that all about? And why is beating yourself up the best option on the menu when you make a mistake, right? Tough questions, counterintuitive, but that's kind of the road to freedom.
Yeah, and this is what Will was talking about earlier, as far as these are the patterns. This is the programming that is kind of at our base level in the critter brain that we're not necessarily consciously aware of until we shine the flashlight on it. And when you shine the flashlight on painful things, it's a little painful, but this is pain that you live with every single day. It's always there, that we're having to tamp down. And when you shine the flashlight on it, brings awareness to it. Now you can identify what is it that you need to change, so you can let this go. Just, when you let go of this, you don't have to tamp it down. You don't have to manage it anymore. It's out of your system. And there's
that's a great point.
Yeah, there's
'Cause,
all kinds of ways of doing it, but it's typically it's not going to be easy, because this is part of what's been keeping you alive and gotten to where you're at today. We need to honor and respect that. And through that honor and respect is also just being honest with yourself that I don't want this anymore, and I need to figure out a way of letting it go.
yeah, yeah. And a lot of people don't explore themselves because it's painful. But what you said is, such a fundamentally important point. If you don't want to do it because it's painful, you're already living in pain. It's just not conscious pain. And if you make the unconscious pain conscious, it's going to be uncomfortable for a while, but it's like ripping a Band-Aid off.
Right.
Eventually it will pass.
Yeah.
But if you're scared what you might find, or if you think then like, oh, that's too painful. It's like, well, your body and your psyche is already living in pain. Right. The effects are already there. You've just disowned them and made them unconscious, or like who you are, basically.
Right.
But that still is having a detrimental effect on you, even if it's not conscious.
Right. These are the roadblocks that a lot of time people, I feel blocked, I move towards something and then I get stuck, I stop. These are the things that are often preventing you from moving towards what it is that you want. You might be able to move a little bit towards, but then there's always that, it's like this invisible wall that you just keep on bouncing into. And until you address the feelings behind that invisible wall, that barricade, whatever it is, the gap in the road, that impossible jump, whatever that is for you, until you address it, it's always going to be there. So, and making things smiley and happy is not the answer. It's a good short-term fix maybe, but it's not the answer.
Yeah, I mean, if that's the compensation, it kept you alive at one point when you were much smaller, probably, but not so much now. And that might sound counterintuitive as well. But yeah, perfection does not exist. It just, some point you go through life, and if you are a perfectionist, before you were one, at some point life was just kind of difficult and kind of hard in a certain way, and you might think, well, that doesn't make sense. I never went through any huge hardships in my life. But this can be on an emotional level, and you have to think about what the reality of a 2-year-old is, what the reality of a 3-year-old is, what's the reality of a 4-year-old. Like, when you step into that, they have much different considerations than grown adults with bank accounts and, cars and all this stuff have. It's really different. But this is where these patterns and beliefs come online.
Right.
But perfectionism, we're basically like, if I can just be perfect, then everything will be okay. If I never make a mistake, I'll feel okay and everyone else will be okay.
Right.
And that's completely untenable. And it kind of has the magical thinking of a 3-year-old.
Right. And you mentioned a couple of times that when you go through this, a lot of the thought processes are kind of counterintuitive. It's like, we're actually saying turn left where it seems like you would want to turn right. And part of that is what you were just talking about with, it's that understanding that a 2-year-old have, that understanding that a 3-year-old has. They don't have the adult mentality when these beliefs and identities and these patterns are being created in our systems. So as adults, when we're trying to apply logic in our adult brain to, well, that doesn't seem right. That's why would anybody think like that? Well,
yeah,
because we're dealing with the 2-year-old version of you who did not conceptualize the world the same way that you do today.
Yeah.
So
we are not the age you would call yourself right now. We're all ages. We collect them. We don't turn them. We're all ages all the time. Like, our brains kind of just layer on top of it. And so these younger versions usually kind of set the boundaries of what can be experienced or believed about ourselves or about the world.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, yeah, should it be that way? Probably not.
Right.
But it's the way it is. Understanding a bit about developmental psychology, I think they should teach it in schools. I think it'd be a better
Huge.
world if everyone had just the tiniest notion about everyone. There are some things that link every human on the planet who have ever existed.
Yeah.
You know, we all breathe oxygen. We all need water.
Mm-hmm.
We all need medical care from someone who's not us at some point. And we were all kids at one point.
Right.
So this is like pretty fundamental stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So important. And this actually will show up for those of you watching. If you know somebody and you experience this on hopefully just a semi-regular basis, or not even regular basis, but somebody who literally throws a temper tantrum, and you have a conversation with them and there's like no logic, is kind of pay attention to their face. And you can actually see them turn into a 2-year-old. And it's because they're actually activating the part of their brain that's that 2-year-old experience. And that's why when you are trying to have a logical conversation with this person, you simply cannot. But if you look at it, they will actually digress in age. And, you know, they get the pouty lip and all of that type of stuff. You'll see it in all kinds of different ways. A lot of times we're not consciously aware of it because we don't know to look for it. But when you look for it and you see it, it's huge, because at that moment in time, if you're trying to talk to somebody as an adult, you're literally dealing, I don't care if the person's 20, 30, 40, 50, 80, 90, 100, in that moment in time, their collective brain power is that of a 2-year-old.
Yeah.
As you know, I'm being very broad here.
Well, you could use other terms. It's like when you get triggered, the trigger kicks you back to the age where the decision or the violation of the decision came online. Right. And since that's young, you get triggered into a younger version of yourself, and you behave from a mentality of a younger version of yourself.
I feel like that.
If you've ever watched a couple fight about nothing, that's because they're not the ages mentally of the ages they are at that moment. And if that's been you, just know that this happens.
Right. I feel like that's a potential blog post or a blog post topic for us. We'll have to work on the title, but are you acting like a 2-year-old?
Yes.
And I want my mommy.
Yeah.
Well, should we we're an hour in. You want to tackle number 4 at this point in time?
Sure. Let's do it quickly.
All right. Let's tackle number 4. Acknowledge your losses and move on to your successes. I feel like that's kind of what we touched on a little bit earlier. Don't focus on the failure, but focus on the positive. Winners are people who never fail, but people who never quit. It's important to never let success get to your head or failure to your heart. The secret of getting ahead is to acknowledge your failures and have the wisdom to apply them to new opportunities with an S.
Interesting. Yeah, I think we talked a bit about this in different kind of, funky parsemeal kind of ways, but that makes me think of, you can acknowledge your failures. You can just also just kind of look over to your past and acknowledge that the past is the past and you have nothing but choice about the future. That's kind of a quicker maneuver.
Yeah.
But also when they say there are no failures, there's only people who give up or quit, something to that effect.
Yeah. Never fail. Yeah. People who never quit.
Yeah. Yeah. And that, They don't really say it here, but I think that brings up an important point where I was talking a bit about like a map metaphor. You know, if you're going to sail a ship somewhere, you have to have X marks the spot of the destination.
Right.
And you have to have those in your life too. And they have to be really, and this is where it's like be getting real with yourself, being honest with yourself, not fooling yourself. You have to really be clear that you actually want what you think you want.
Right.
Because when you're going to sail to this destination, it's going to get rocky sometimes. It's going to be unpredictable sometimes. It's going to be like hot and you're going to be stuck in the sun sometimes. You're going to get covered in like really scary like downpours sometimes. Right. But if you're heading towards something that's worth it, you're going to encounter a lot of failure on the way. You just don't quit towards it. Right. So knowing that what you're working towards is truly what you want is like fundamentally important.
Yeah. So very much so. And part of that with that whole map analogy is also under being honest with where you're at, right? Because if you're going to take a ship from here to here, and so it's like, oh, it's going to take so long. I'm going to need these supplies. I'm going to need this, this, and this. But you're not really honest with where you're at because you're really down here. You might be setting yourself up for failure if you have to go twice the distance, as an example. You know, people, you go back to the Magellan days and the Christopher Columbus days where it's like, I have no idea what's out there, but I think if we have enough, if we pack the ship full of supplies, we'll make it wherever it is. That is a special person right there to be able to get on that ship and go, okay, let's, maybe they're running from something. I don't know, where this is the best option, but I'm like, you know, people back then, I was watching, even I can't think of it. The, Viking guy, Ragnarok they've made a show about him.
Don't know.
He landed in England. He was the one that figured out a sundial. Because at the time that they did things, you had to be and specifically, and I'm speaking from little to no understanding of this, but from this TV show that was based on true events, essentially you had to keep your sights on the shoreline back then. That's advanced. That's as advanced as their technology was. If I can see the shoreline, I know where I'm going. However, if you need to get from here to here and you can't see the shoreline wherever there is, they didn't know if they were going straight or not. So you have the North Star and you have these different things. And then one of them figured out the sundial. I forget specifically what he did, but he essentially put a sundial like in a bowl of water or something. And so it would rock and those types of things. And then they knew that they were heading in the right direction during the day also. Don't quote me on the technology here, folks. But there was also a belief that there was land over there. And so, you know, he had strong enough convictions that there was land over there, you know, where so many people thought it was suicide. And who knows, you know, Earth could have been flat back in the day. All kinds of crazy things. There could have been mythical creatures over there. Nobody knows. So how do we get onto this? I have no idea. I feel like I went on.
I don't know, but it makes me these certain people have these propensities. It's pretty like insane and pretty amazing all at the same time. Because it's like the only thing, I don't think there's anything the brain hates more than the unknown. Excuse me.
Yes.
So it's like, and this is where the mythology of monsters and everything. It's like when you're a kid, what's under the bed is an unknown, and then our brain fills it in to go with the dark feeling, and we made up monsters and all these. It's like, wow,
we have to make sense of it in some way.
Yeah. So sailing to unknown lands, that's terrifying, and probably was suicide for most people. You hear about the heroes, you don't hear about all the people who died, because they get to write the history books. But it's also a fundamental part of how we work with clients. You have to get really clear about what you want, and you have to get really clear about where you are. And you have to get really, really clear about the richness of what it's going to be like when you get to what you want. So it's not an unknown in your mind anymore. It's more of a known. Yeah. Not every circumstance can be like foreseen, and maybe it'll be a little different than what you think. But it's really important to have that imprinted in the mind that, okay, this is what I want and this is what it will be like when I get there, so that it's not threatening to the critter brain.
Yeah. Because the beliefs make, I forget the cycle, but the beliefs and what's the second word? What we experience.
Beliefs and experience. Yeah.
So there's the, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Was it the belief or the experience? Did the experience create the belief, or did the belief create the experience? But once it starts, it's the cycle. So you've got to be willing to change the belief so that it is allowed to see a new experience, or you got to change the experience so that you can have a new belief about the way things work. So
exactly, it is the chicken or the egg thing, because they inform each other.
Right.
Easier to change the belief with a professional who knows how to do that. I would say you can change. Let's substitute in habit for experience. We try to change a habit by functionally doing something different in the world.
Right.
Eventually, if you white knuckle through that and stick with it, and it actually takes in the system, right, it changes instantaneously.
Right.
At some point, if that happens, then your experience has changed a belief, but it can also work the other way around too.
Right. Yeah, and it doesn't have to be as difficult as white knuckling. So we have to work within the programming of the mind, and there are easier ways to kind of reprogram and provide additional resources to the mind than just white knuckling.
I think all this stuff is pointed to what we kind of net back to: making more conscious choices, working towards internal alignment of your goals, and living your authentic life instead of living inauthentically for one reason or another.
Because there's so much out there, and life is so much easier when, imagine doing math and always adding in extra digits. How difficult would it be to make 2 and 3 equal 4? It's like, that's got to be really hard to do, versus when you're in alignment and 2 plus 2 equals 4, it's very smooth, it's very clean, and okay, I got time and resources for so much more in my life, because I'm actually working within my system the way my system wants to work. Super important. All right.
True.
Anything else you want to add about acknowledge your losses and move on to your success? I mean, for me, it's all about redirection, right? Focus on what's working.
Yeah. And I would say, I guess, it kind of depends on the person and the thing, but sometimes it's really important to process or grieve, I guess, past losses, past experiences. It doesn't come up as much as you would think. But if there's things in the way of you moving forward, feeling those feelings and acknowledging them and just kind of processing them through your system can be really important. Or like I said, sometimes the move is just kind of, if we can congruently believe that we just have choice about our future, then we can kind of look back at the past and just be with it and say, okay, like this past is, my personal history is incredibly important, and it is what it is. Now let me point my orientation towards right now and to the future, and how right now will create my future.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But if there's things you have to grieve, then you have to grieve.
Go through the process.
If you got your heart broken in an 8-year relationship, before you can move on to the next one, you're going to have to process that a bit. So if there's functionally something like that, that's an important step as well.
Right. Yeah. And I think the key question you can ask yourself is, am I okay with this? And again, not that it's okay, but okay.
Yeah.
So always a good question to ask yourself before you move forward.
Yeah, man.
Okay.
We have added so many things to each one of these points.
I do. I feel we could rewrite this article and it just turned into a thesis paper or something like that. So kudos to Inc. for being able to condense this down into manageable bite-sized pieces so we can just expand and extrapolate the crap out of it.
Just blow it up completely.
Blow it up, folks. We're blowing it up.
Yeah, see it blow it up. I guess we'll blow it up next week in part 2.
Next week. Next week, part 2. We got 6 more steps to cover in this article, which will all be very valuable information. With that,
are we clear about will it be worth it? I think so. That's a good X on the map for us. So yeah, stay tuned and come on the ride with us next week.
Perfect. With that, I'm going to turn up the music a little bit. And we will see you all next week. Same place, same time, 10:30 in the morning, Pacific Standard Time, on both Facebook and YouTube. All right, well, good to see you. Look forward to chatting with you next week.
Good to see you too, Ryan. Thanks you as always. We'll see you next week.